CNN
The
Live.
Intelligence Community Inspector General formally notified the Congress that the administration was forbidding him from turning over a whistleblower complaint on Constitution Day. This is a violation of law. Shortly thereafter, press reports began to break of a phone call by the President of the United States calling upon a foreign power to intervene in his election. This is a breach of his constitutional responsibilities. The facts are these. The Intelligence Community Inspector General, who was appointed by President Trump, determined that the complaint is both of urgent concern and credible. And its disclosure, he went on to say, relates to one of the most significant and important of the Director of National Intelligence's responsibility to the American people. On Thursday, the Inspector General testified before the House Intelligence Committee, stating that the acting Director of National Intelligence blocked him from disclosing the whistleblower complaint. This is a violation of law. The law is unequivocal. The DNI staff, it says the DNI, Director of National Intelligence, shall provide Congress the full whistleblower complaint. For more than 25 years, I've served on the Intelligence Committee as a member, as the ranking member, as part of the Gang of Four, even before I was in the leadership. I was there when we created the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. That did not exist before 2004. I was there even earlier in the 90s when we wrote the whistleblower laws and continue to write them to improve them to ensure the security of our intelligence and the safety of our whistleblowers. I know what their purpose was, and we proceeded with balance and caution as we wrote the laws. I can say with authority the Trump administration's actions undermine both our national security and our intelligence and our protections of the whistleblowers, more than both. This Thursday, the acting DNI will appear before the House Intelligence Committee. At that time, he must turn over the whistleblower's full complaint to the committee. He will have to choose whether to break the law or honor his responsibility to the Constitution. On the final day of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, when our Constitution was adopted, Americans gathered on the steps of Independence Hall to await the news of the government our founders had crafted. They asked Benjamin Franklin, "What do we have, a republic or a monarchy?" Franklin replied, "A republic if you can keep it." Our responsibility is to keep it. Our republic endures because of the wisdom of our Constitution, enshrined in three co-equal branches of government, serving as checks and balances on each other. The actions taken to date by the President have seriously violated the Constitution, especially when the President says, Article 2 says I can do whatever I want. For the past several months, we have been investigating in our committees and litigating in the courts, so the House can gather all the relevant facts and consider whether to exercise its full Article 1 powers, including a constitutional power of the utmost gravity, approval of articles of impeachment. And this week, the President has admitted to asking the President of Ukraine to take actions which would benefit him politically. The actions of the Trump presidency revealed the dishonorable fact of the President's betrayal of his oath of office, betrayal of our national security, and betrayal of the integrity of our elections. Therefore, today, I'm announcing the House of Representatives moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry. I'm directing our 6 committees to proceed with their investigations under that umbrella of impeachment inquiry. The President must be held accountable. No one is above the law. Getting back to our founders, in the darkest days of the American Revolution, Thomas Paine wrote, "The times have found us. The times found them to fight for and establish our democracy. The times have found us today, not to place ourselves in the same category of greatness as our founders, but to place us in the urgency of protecting and defending our Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic." In the words of Ben Franklin, to keep our republic. I thank our chairman, Chairman Nadler, Chairman Schiff, Chairman Nadler of Judiciary, Chairman Schiff of Intelligence, Chairman Engel of Foreign Affairs, Chairman Cummings of Oversight, and Chairman Cummings I've been in touch with constantly. He's a master of so much, but including inspectors general and whistleblowers. Congresswoman Richie Neal of the Ways and Means Committee, Congresswoman Maxine Waters of the Foreign Financial Services Committee. And I commend all of our members, our colleagues, for their thoughtful approach to all of this, for their careful statements. God bless them, and God bless America. Thank you all.
Madam Speaker, never before has the President been convicted by the Senate. What does this accomplish if the Senate doesn't?
That was House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in Washington addressing reporters, officially announcing that she is directing the House to begin an official inquiry of impeachment into actions President Trump is accused of. Just to go over the allegations, he is accused of calling the president of Ukraine and withholding foreign aid in order for it to sort of politically gain, in order to ask them to investigate or to look into some accusations he leveled against Joe Biden, who is, of course, a person running to be the Democratic candidate in the presidential election, and Joe Biden's son. There was a whistleblower complaint as well, and that's what Speaker Pelosi is referring to, that President Trump so far has refused to give over to Congress to aid them in their investigation of this matter. She says that that contravenes or violates the Constitution. I want to bring in two people who have been listening in with us to sort of go over, analyze the significance of what we just heard, because it certainly is very significant. Aaron Blake is a senior political reporter at the Washington Post. He's in Washington with us. And then CBC's Ellen Morrow, I think, is not too far down the street. She also joins us from Washington. Hi to both of you. Nice to see you. Thanks for making time. Let's just start with how significant is what we just heard. Aaron, I'll begin with you.
Well, it's very significant. I think it's important to emphasize that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is talking about an impeachment inquiry, which is an investigation that's formally under the auspices of a possible impeachment down the road. This does not necessarily mean that the House Democrats are going to vote to impeach necessarily. At the same time, this is the kind of step that it's kind of hard to walk back once you go down that road, especially because the Democratic base is so much on board with impeachment right now. This is also significant, I would add, because Nancy Pelosi might have been the biggest Democratic figure in Washington who is actually resisting this kind of step. We've seen Democratic presidential candidates come out in support of impeachment. We've seen committee chairmen who are in charge of these investigations go further than she has. So the fact that she's now getting to that point in a way that she hasn't before is significant, and I think it really paves the way for the president to maybe become the third U.S. president ever to be impeached.
Ellen, let's go over what brought everyone to this moment, what preceded it, the accusations leveled against the president right now, if you could help us understand those.
Well, Vashti, this story really began building last week, and we heard Nancy Pelosi reference that in her comments when there were these early press reports about this whistleblower complaint. Now, essentially, it stems from a call that President Trump had with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, in which the president, and the president has admitted to this, he talked to the president of Ukraine about investigating Joe Biden's son, Hunter, on corruption. Now, the broader question is whether there was a quid pro quo, but whether it was investigate him or we won't give you this aid, investigate him or we won't do this. Now, that is still somewhat of a gray area, but there were reports last night, including in the Washington Post, about how foreign aid was withheld from Ukraine before that call actually happened. So there are a lot of questions surrounding this. We know the Democrats were already investigating this call to see if the president was essentially pressuring the president of Ukraine to conduct an investigation designed to hurt President Trump's potentially biggest political foe at home, Joe Biden, should Joe Biden win that nomination. And this allegation that the president is seeking foreign help to essentially help him in the 2020 election. Was those allegations a step too far for so many Democrats who, even after the Mueller report, were resisting the push from the Democratic base to try to pursue an impeachment inquiry? What we saw today was Democrats who are moderate, who are in Republican states, who have previously been against impeachment, come forward and say, we need to look at these allegations. This is a step too far if these allegations are true, and that it's time for this inquiry to go ahead.
And I want to talk about that in a second with you, Aaron. But first, I do want to share with everyone a tweet from the president. He just tweeted less than a minute ago, such an important day at the United Nations. That's where he was earlier today. So much work and so much success, he writes. And the Democrats purposely had to ruin and demean it with more breaking news, witch hunt garbage. That is a quote from the president. So bad for our country, he concludes the tweet. I imagine not too much of a surprising response, Aaron, from the president. Tell us a bit about his actions over the past week and what he is saying he's able to give up and what he's not willing to give over to Congress.
Well, at the root here is that there was a whistleblower complaint that we still haven't seen and Congress hasn't seen. The law seems to suggest that this whistleblower complaint is something that should be shared with the relevant committees in Congress. That would be the intelligence committees, because this has to do with a whistleblower from the intelligence community. The White House and the Justice Department have both gotten involved in this and have basically said this cannot be turned over to Congress because of some concerns about potentially privileged communications. That generally means executive privilege. It involves things that are the president talking to people. And in certain circumstances, it's understood that the president has a right to privacy in those conversations, because you don't want to have everything you say as president being leaked out and being, driven through by the media. But that's not something that's apparently good enough for Congress. Just about an hour ago here, actually, we had a unanimous vote in the U.S. Senate, so that's all Democrats and all Republicans who are voting, who said that the White House should turn over this whistleblower report. This is something that Republicans haven't been very outspoken about, but they do feel like this is something they should have oversight of. So that was a significant step here. And then the other thing that we saw today that I think is important is President Trump said that he would release a transcript of his phone call with the Ukrainian president on July 25th. This is a significant phone call, obviously, because we want to know what they were talking about. Obviously, they talked about these investigations involving the Bidens, but we also know that this isn't necessarily the only piece. Actually, according to what the Inspector General told Congress last week in closed-door testimony, this is merely one piece of the larger whistleblower complaint. So even if there's nothing damning in this actual transcript, that doesn't necessarily mean that there might not be something damning elsewhere in the evidence.
If you're just joining us now, this is Power and Politics, and yes, we are still covering our country's federal election, but there is breaking news out of the United States that we're talking about with Ellen Morrow and Aaron Blake. U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi has directed the beginnings, essentially, of a move towards the impeachment process, an impeachment inquiry. It's not the same thing as impeachment, but an impeachment inquiry based on a number of accusations leveled at the President of the United States over the past few weeks. He has tweeted out in response about his day, but then went on to say or characterize the announcement by Speaker Pelosi as purposely, he writes, she purposely had to ruin and demean it, or the Democrats did, with more breaking news, witch hunt garbage, so bad for our country. Ellen, you had touched on the diversions within the Democrats prior to this issue around impeachment and the sort of lack of consensus about whether to proceed. Pelosi, as Aaron mentioned, had also been Speaker Pelosi had been one of the ones most resistant to the idea. What specifically do you think turned the dial in this instance? Is it just sort of the everyone else in the party that became sort of supportive of the idea, or what do you think it was, Ellen?
I think there are a number of factors. I mean, we are leading up to an election. Nancy Pelosi was and has been under pressure from the more left-wing part of the Democratic base to move forward on impeachment. You know, we see often tweets from the so-called squad, those women in Congress, you know, they've been calling for impeachment. So that's one aspect of this. But I think what we heard in Pelosi's comments was, you know, her making the case for why these allegations are a step too far, that why the president admitting to talking to a president of a foreign country to investigate the family of a political rival is a step too far. You know, we heard her several times today, not just in those comments, but when she spoke earlier in the afternoon, she quoted Benjamin Franklin saying, you know, you have a republic if we can keep it. That's not the exact quote, but essentially using that line to say that this is a step too far for her party, and that this is the time where Democrats in Congress, as part of a co-equal branch of government, have to stand up to the executive branch. And if you think to those funds that were withheld or delayed going to Ukraine, that was money that was appropriated by Congress to go to Ukraine. So a lot of Democratic congressmen and women see that as an abuse of power, an egregious abuse of power, that the White House would step in and delay that, essentially, when those were funds that were, again, appropriated by Congress. So this, as you said, the dam really broke today. There was all this momentum throughout the day. You know, network news channels here in the United States have had tickers on the side of the screen today saying how many Democrats had come out in impeachment. The number grew exponentially throughout the day. And I think, you know, you hear Speaker Pelosi several times, you know, talk about aspects of the Constitution as building this case today. And that's important, not just as justification, but also I think what she was attempting to do as well is to bring this above partisan politics. Now, that's obviously an incredibly hard task, probably an impossible task. But I think, you know, in making those repeated references, that's partly what she was trying to do.
I'm sure some might view it that way. Aaron, I'll give you the final word. I just want to mention quickly for our viewers that in addition to the tweet that we read out of Donald Trump, President Trump, he's now tweeted something else saying that they never even saw the transcript of the call, referring to the Democrats, and then ending with calling it a total witch hunt. Once again, and the transcript of the call is in reference to the call that he had with his counterpart in Ukraine. He says he's willing to release it. As we look forward, Aaron, what exactly are you looking for? How does this, what markers are there? How does this play out now? Because the process of impeachment isn't an overnight one.
Right. It actually takes a few months, generally speaking. At least that's what history has shown. A couple important points here. One is that it's obviously very important what comes out of this Ukraine situation. We don't know a whole lot beyond what's been in media reports. The transcript of that phone call is going to be important, as will a potential turning over of the whistleblower complaint to Congress. That issue is not settled. The other is the politics of this. This is an issue that Nancy Pelosi resisted in large part because there is a concern in the Democratic Party about what this could mean for the 2020 election. And that's because back in 1998, House Republicans launched an impeachment of Bill Clinton, and in that election, Bill Clinton's party actually did better than they were expected. So there is this reluctance stemming from that experience. I think there are some significant differences between this situation and what we saw in the late 90s, including the fact that Bill Clinton was very popular back then. It was a personal issue rather than official actions. So now Democrats basically have crossed that Rubicon. They're going to see what happens. But I think, again, it's going to be very difficult for them to go back now that they've crossed this threshold into an actual impeachment inquiry.
Okay, I have to leave it there, but thank you to both of you very much for sticking around with us and your insights this evening. Thanks to Aaron Blake of the Washington Post and the CBC's Ellen Morrow. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.